The stars burned cold in the emptiness of space as Captain Jake Morrison stood before the main view screen of Sentinel-9. His coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but he barely noticed. The defense station hummed quietly around him, while his crew worked at their stations with practiced efficiency. Jake was 42 years old with 15 years of military service behind him, and he had seen plenty of action during the Titan Wars. Nothing in those years prepared him for what was about to happen. Lieutenant Sophie Grant looked up from her tactical console with a frown crossing her young face. She was 30 years old and had graduated at the top of her class from Luna Academy. Her fingers danced across the holographic controls as she analyzed the incoming data. "Captain, we have multiple signatures dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the system." Sophie's voice was calm, but Jake could hear the tension underneath. He moved to stand behind her and watched as red dots began appearing on the tactical display. One dot became 10, then 50, then 100. The numbers kept climbing. "How many?" Jake asked quietly. Sophie's hands moved faster across her console, and her eyes widened slightly as the final count appeared. 200 warships, Captain. All of them are military grade with heavy weapons, and they are in formation. Jake felt his stomach tighten, but his face remained calm. He had learned long ago that a captain's composure set the tone for the entire crew. Chief Engineer Peter Hayes appeared from the lower deck with grease on his hands and concern in his weathered face. The old engineer was 55 and had maintained every system on this station for the past decade. "I heard the alarms," he said simply. "What are we dealing with?" "Company," Jake replied and gestured to the screen. "Big company." Peter wiped his hands on a rag and studied the tactical display with the practiced eye of someone who had seen combat before. "Those are Valdrin ships," he said after a moment. "I recognize the drive signatures from the database. They have been expanding their territory for the past 3,000 years. Sophie nodded and pulled up additional information on her screen. "The Valdrin Empire controls most of the Orion Arm, and they have a reputation for crushing anyone who stands in their way. They have subjugated 47 different species and they do not negotiate." "Well," Jake said with a slight smile, "there is a first time for everything." He walked back to his command chair and sat down with his usual calm demeanor. "Sophie, send a message to Fleet Command and let them know we have visitors. Include all tactical data and tell them we are following protocol." Sophie's fingers flew across her console as she encoded the quantum transmission. "Message sent, Captain. Fleet Command acknowledges and is standing by." Jake nodded and turned his attention back to the view screen, where the Valdrin fleet was growing, larger as it approached their position. The Valdrin ships were massive and angular with dark hulls covered in weapon, forts and armor plating. They moved with the confidence of a military force that had never known defeat. At the center of the formation was the flagship, larger than all the others and bristling with enough firepower to level a small moon. Jake watched them approach and wondered what the commander of that fleet was thinking. Did they know anything about humanity, or were humans just another primitive species to be conquered and added to their growing empire? The answer came moments later when Sophie's console beeped with an incoming transmission. "They are hailing us, Captain." Jake straightened in his chair and tugged his uniform into place. "Put them through." The view screen flickered and changed to show the interior of the Valdrin flagship. Standing in the center of the command deck was Commander Zarthex, the Valdrin military leader. He was 9 feet tall with 4 muscular arms and reptilian features that would have terrified most species. His scales were deep purple and his eyes glowed with a predatory intelligence. He wore armor that gleamed in the harsh lighting of his ship and carried himself with absolute authority. "Primitive humans," Zarthex began, and his voice was deep and rumbling like distant thunder. "I am Commander Zarthex of the Valdrin Empire, and I speak with the authority of Emperor Korgath himself. Your species has been discovered and claimed by the Empire. You will surrender all military installations and colonies within 1 solar hour. Your people will submit to Valdrin rule and serve the Empire. Resistance is pointless and will result in the complete destruction of your worlds. This is your only warning." The transmission cut off before Jake could respond, and the screen returned to showing the approaching fleet. The bridge of Sentinel-9 was silent for a long moment. Peter Hayes was the first to speak, and his voice was grim. "Well, that was pleasant." Sophie looked at Jake with worry in her eyes. "Captain, their weapons are charging. They are preparing to attack if we do not comply." Jake leaned back in his chair and considered the situation. The Valdrin Empire had just demanded the surrender of humanity, based on nothing more than their reputation and military strength. They assumed humans would fold immediately like so many other species had done before. It was a reasonable assumption based on their past experience, but it was also completely wrong. Sophie, open a channel back to their flagship. Sophie worked her console and nodded when the channel was ready. You are transmitting, Captain. Jake sat forward slightly and looked directly at the view screen, as if he could see Zarthex on the other side. Commander Zarthex, this is Captain Jake Morrison of the Terran Defense Station Sentinel-9. I have received your message and I appreciate you taking the time to introduce yourself. However, I must respectfully decline your offer. Humanity governs itself, and we have no interest in joining your empire. I suggest you turn your fleet around and leave our space. We have no desire for conflict, but we will defend ourselves if necessary. That is our only warning. Jake made a gesture and Sophie cut the transmission. Peter Hayes let out a low whistle and shook his head. You just told the most powerful military force in this region to go away. They are not going to like that. Jake smiled slightly and picked up his cold coffee. No, I do not imagine they will. Sophie was already tracking the Valdrin response on her sensors. Captain, their entire fleet is advancing and all weapons are now fully charged. They are preparing for a full assault. Time to perimeter, she asked. 18 minutes at current speed, Sophie replied. Jake set down his coffee and stood up. Peter, power up the grid. Full strength on all emitters. Peter grinned despite the situation. Now we are talking. He headed back down to engineering while his fingers flew across a handheld control pad. Jake watched the Valdrin fleet continue its approach and felt the familiar calm that always came before combat. The station's systems began to hum with increased power as Peter brought the defensive grid online. Sophie monitored the approaching threat while her predictive algorithms calculated dozens of possible attack patterns. The crew of Sentinel-9 moved to battle stations with quiet efficiency. Alarms blared throughout the station, but there was no panic and no fear. These men and women had trained for this moment, and they trusted their captain completely. On the Valdrin flagship, Commander Zarthex stared at the view screen in disbelief. The human captain had just refused his demand and suggested the Empire leave. It was the most audacious response Zarthex had received in his entire military career. He had conquered 47 species, and not one of them had dared to speak to him with such casual dismissal. These humans clearly did not understand the power they faced. They would learn soon enough. Zarthex turned to his weapons officer with fury burning in his eyes. Prepare all forward batteries. Target their station and surrounding orbital platforms. When I give the order, destroy everything. The weapons officer saluted and began inputting commands. The Valdrin fleet bristled with energy as thousands of weapons charged to full power. Back on Sentinel-9, Jake checked his watch and noted the time. Sophie counted down the minutes until the fleet reached weapons range. Captain, they will be in optimal firing position in 5 minutes. All of our defensive systems are online and ready. Peter's voice came through the intercom from engineering. Grid is at full power, Captain. We have enough juice to handle whatever they throw at us. Jake nodded to himself and settled back into his command chair. Good work, everyone. Remember your training and stay calm. We are about to show the Valdrin Empire why humanity does not surrender. The crew acknowledged with quiet confidence. The stage was set and the galaxy was about to witness something it had never seen before. Commander Zarthex raised one of his forearms and gave the order his fleet had been waiting for. Fire all weapons. The Valdrin ships responded instantly with thousands of plasma bolts erupting from their gun ports, in a brilliant display of destructive power. The barrage lit up the darkness of space like a swarm of angry stars, as the energy weapons streaked toward Sentinel-9. Each bolt carried enough power to punch through standard military shielding, and the combined assault was designed to overwhelm any defensive system known to the galaxy. Zarthex watched the attack with satisfaction and allowed himself a moment of pride. The humans would be vaporized in seconds, and their pitiful defenses would not even slow the bombardment. On Sentinel-9, Jake Morrison watched the incoming fire through the main view screen with his arms crossed casually over his chest. Sophie Grant's fingers moved across her tactical console as she tracked every incoming bolt with precision. Captain, impact in 5 seconds. Jake glanced at his watch and nodded. Peter, you ready down there? The engineer's voice came back through the intercom with barely contained excitement. Born ready, Captain. Show these folks what humanity builds when we put our minds to it. Sophie continued her countdown with professional calm. 4, 3, 2, 1, impact. The plasma bolts reached the invisible barrier 2 kilometers from the station, and simply vanished. The defensive grid that surrounded Sentinel-9 was unlike anything the Valdrin had encountered before. Humanity had spent 2 centuries studying ancient alien ruins discovered on Mars and Europa. Among those ruins were fragments of technology from a civilization that had mastered energy manipulation millions of years ago. Human scientists had taken those fragments and improved upon them with innovations that even the ancient builders had never imagined. The result was a defensive system that did not merely block incoming attacks, but absorbed their energy and redirected it into a massive power grid spanning the entire sector. The Valdrin barrage hit the barrier, and every single joule of energy was captured and converted into additional defensive power. Not one bolt reached the station's hull. Confusion rippled through the Valdrin fleet like a wave. Officers stared at their sensor displays in disbelief while trying to understand what had just happened. Commander Zarthex leaned forward in his command chair with his eyes narrowing dangerously. "What happened?" he demanded. His weapons officer checked and rechecked the readings before responding with uncertainty in his voice. "Commander, all weapons fired successfully and reached the target. But there is no damage, no debris. The energy just disappeared." Zarthex's claws scraped against the armrest of his chair. "Impossible. Their shields should have collapsed under that assault. Scan them again and find me an explanation." While the Valdrin fleet scrambled for answers, Sophie Grant turned to Jake with a small smile. "Captain, their weapons had no effect. All incoming energy has been absorbed, and the grid is now at 140% capacity. We actually gained power from their attack." Jake allowed himself a slight grin. "Well, that was nice of them. Peter, how are our systems looking?" "Everything is green, Captain. The grid is purring like a kitten. A very large, very angry kitten." Jake stood up and walked closer to the view screen where the Valdrin fleet hung in space, looking considerably less confident than before. "Sophie, activate the gravity well projectors. Let us give them something else to think about." Sophie's fingers danced across her console. "Activating now, Captain." Space itself began to warp around the Valdrin fleet as hidden projectors scattered throughout the sector came online. The gravity well technology was another human innovation, based on theoretical physics that had taken decades to perfect. The projectors created localized distortions in spacetime that could trap ships as effectively as a physical net. The Valdrin vessels were designed for linear combat, where ships maneuvered in predictable patterns and engaged at optimal ranges. They had never encountered an enemy that could manipulate gravity itself. The flagship shuddered as invisible forces pulled it in multiple directions at once. Navigation systems screamed warnings as sensors detected gravitational anomalies that should not exist. The engines strained against forces they were never built to handle. Throughout the fleet, Valdrin ships began colliding with each other as their navigation systems failed to compensate for the constantly shifting gravity fields. A destroyer drifted into the side of a cruiser, and both ships tumbled away from the formation with their hulls crumpled from the impact. A squadron of fighters tried to break away from the main fleet, but found themselves pulled back by invisible hands. The perfect military formation that Zarthex had been so proud of dissolved into chaos within seconds. Ships fired their thrusters at maximum power, trying to escape the gravitational trap, but only succeeded in wasting fuel and spinning themselves into new collisions. The mighty Valdrin armada was reduced to a helpless collection of ships tumbling through space. Zarthex gripped the armrests of his command chair so hard that his claws left deep gouges in the metal. His ship lurched violently to one side, and he barely avoided being thrown from his seat. "Status report," he roared over the sound of alarms. His helmsman struggled to maintain control while sweat poured down his scaled face. "Commander, we cannot navigate. Gravity is fluctuating across the entire sector. Multiple ships have collided, and our formation is completely broken. We need to retreat and regroup." Zarthex's pride would not allow such a humiliating withdrawal. "No. Continue firing on the human station. If we cannot maneuver, then we will destroy them from here. All ships concentrate fire on a single point of their barrier. We will overwhelm it through sheer volume." The Valdrin fleet responded to their commander's orders despite the chaos around them. Every ship that could still aim its weapons focused on a single coordinate point in the defensive grid. Thousands of plasma bolts converged on one spot as the Valdrin attempted to punch through by concentrating all their firepower. The barrier flickered under the sustained assault, and energy readings spiked across the board. For a moment it seemed like the Valdrin strategy might work. The concentrated fire was causing localized stress on the grid. and the barrier at that point began to glow brighter and brighter as it struggled to absorb the massive influx of energy. Sophie watched her displays with concern. "Captain, they are focusing their fire. Grid integrity at that point is holding, but we are seeing elevated stress readings." Peter Hayes was already moving before Jake could give the order, rerouting additional power from the colony fusion reactors now. "Give me just a second here." His fingers flew across the engineering controls as he diverted power from New Seattle's civilian reactors into the military grid. The colony would experience a momentary brownout, but that was a small price to pay. Additional power surged through the defensive network, and the stressed section of the barrier stabilized immediately. Not only did it hold against the Valdrin assault, but it began to glow even brighter as it converted the incoming weapons fire into additional defensive strength. The more the Valdrin attacked, the stronger the barrier became. Peter's voice came back through the intercom with satisfaction. "Crisis averted, Captain. We are now at 160% capacity. At this rate, they are going to power our entire sector for a month." Jake Morrison shook his head slowly and spoke just loud enough for his crew to hear. "Some people never learn. Sophie, I think it is time we showed them what happens when we shoot back. Prepare the particle lance. Target their flagship, but aim 10 meters to the left of the command deck. I want to get their attention without killing anyone." Sophie's expression became focused as she brought up the weapons controls. "Particle lance charging now, Captain. Target locked on the flagship. Displacement is set at 10 meters port side of their bridge. The lance will penetrate their armor but miss all critical systems and crew areas. Ready to fire on your order." Jake took a deep breath and gave the command. Fire. The particle lance was humanity's most powerful directed energy weapon. Scientists had discovered the basic principles in those same ancient ruins, but the execution was pure human engineering. The weapon accelerated subatomic particles to near light speed and focused them into a beam no thicker than a pencil. That beam could punch through any known armor, and the heat generated would vaporize anything it touched. A brilliant blue line of light erupted from Sentinel-9 and crossed the distance to the Valdrin flagship in less than a second. The beam passed through the flagship's shields as if they were not there. It pierced the outer hull armor like paper, burned through 3 interior decks, and exited out the other side of the massive ship. The beam continued traveling for another 1,000,000 kilometers before finally dissipating into space. On the Valdrin flagship, alarms erupted throughout the ship. Damage control teams rushed to seal the breach while officers shouted conflicting orders. Zarthek stood frozen in shock as he stared at the perfectly circular hole that had appeared in the wall, 10 meters to the left of where he stood. The edges of the hole still glowed red with residual heat. If that beam had been aimed just slightly to the right, he and everyone on the command deck would have been instantly vaporized. The human weapon had passed through their most advanced shielding without even slowing down. One shot. One impossibly precise shot that demonstrated. Commander Zarthek stared at the hole in his command deck wall while his mind raced through possibilities, and none of them were good. His pride screamed at him to continue the attack, but his survival instincts told him that pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. The humans had demonstrated capabilities far beyond anything in the Valdrin database. They had absorbed a full fleet barrage without damage, trapped his ships with gravity manipulation, and fired a weapon that ignored shields completely. Worse, they had shown remarkable restraint by deliberately missing a killing shot. Zarthex was a warrior, but he was not a fool. Helmsman, set course back to the hyperspace entry point. All ships are to withdraw immediately. We are returning to the homeworld. His officers looked at him in shock but obeyed without question. The once mighty fleet began a slow and humiliating retreat. News of the Valdrin withdrawal reached Earth within hours, through quantum communication networks that connected all human colonies. Admiral Catherine Wright stood in the command center of the Solar Defense Fleet headquarters, watching data streams flow across holographic displays. She was 58 years old with silver hair and eyes that had witnessed more battles than most people could imagine. Her uniform was immaculate and her bearing spoke of decades of military command. The tactical report from Sentinel-9 was thorough and concerning. Jake Morrison had handled the situation perfectly, but the Valdrin Empire now knew humanity existed and possessed advanced technology. That secret was out, and Catherine knew the Empire would not simply forget about it. She turned to her staff officers and began issuing orders. Recall all deep space reconnaissance ships immediately. Activate Defense Grid Alpha across all border colonies. And send a message to the Council. We need to convene an emergency session. The Terran Council met within the hour in a secure chamber deep beneath Geneva. Representatives from Earth and the 70 colonized systems appeared as holographic projections around a circular table. Catherine Wright stood at the center and presented the situation with military precision. The Valdran Empire has discovered our presence and they attempted to force our surrender. Captain Morrison successfully repelled their attack, but we must assume they will return with greater force. The council members listened in silence as Catherine displayed tactical data showing the size and power of the Valdran military. One representative from the Mars colony spoke up with worry clear in her voice. "Admiral, can we realistically defend against their entire empire?" Catherine's response was calm but firm. "We can and we will. Humanity has prepared for this possibility." The council voted unanimously to authorize full defensive measures. The time for hiding was over. On the Valdran homeworld, Emperor Korgath listened to Zarthex's report with growing fury. The throne room was vast and decorated with trophies from 1,000 conquered worlds. Korgath himself was massive even by Valdran standards, with scales that gleamed like polished obsidian and eyes that burned with intensity. He had ruled the empire for 60 years and expanded its territory more than any emperor before him. Now a species he had never heard of had humiliated one of his best commanders and destroyed his assumption of Valdran supremacy. Korgath's voice was deadly quiet when he spoke. "You are telling me that 200 warships could not destroy a single human station?" Zarthex kept his eyes lowered in respect. "Your Majesty, their technology is unlike anything we have encountered. They possess weapons and defenses that make our own seem primitive. I withdrew to preserve the fleet and report these findings. It was the correct tactical decision." Korgath rose from his throne and descended the steps toward his commander. The Emperor stood even taller than Zarthex, and his presence filled the room with barely contained violence. "You withdrew without permission because these humans frightened you. You abandoned your duty and returned in disgrace." Zarthex met his Emperor's eyes despite the danger. "Yes, Your Majesty. I was frightened because I saw power beyond our understanding. If I had continued the attack, we would have lost the entire fleet and gained nothing. The humans demonstrated restraint by not destroying us when they clearly could have. They are warning us." Korgath's claws flexed, but he did not strike his commander. Instead, he turned to the High Council that sat in judgment on either side of the throne room. "What say you? Should we accept this human warning and retreat from their space? Or do we show them the true might of the Valdran Empire?" Councillor Vareth was the eldest member of the council and had advised 3 emperors before Korgath. His scales were pale with age, but his mind remained sharp. "Your Majesty, I recommend we open diplomatic channels with the humans. Commander Zarthex's report suggests they possess military capabilities that rival or exceed our own. Attacking them again without understanding their full strength would be foolish." Another counselor named Draxon stood up with his armor clanking. "Foolish. We are the Valdran Empire. We have conquered this entire region of space through strength and determination. If we show weakness now, every subject species will question our power. We must crush these humans immediately and decisively. Show the galaxy that the Empire cannot be challenged." Many counselors nodded in agreement while others looked uncertain. Korgath listened to both arguments and made his decision. "Send 3 more fleets to human space. 600 ships total. They will accept our rule or they will be destroyed. There will be no third warning." Catherine Wright received word of the Valdran decision through intelligence channels before the enemy fleets even departed. Humanity had spent decades seeding listening devices throughout known space, and those devices had paid off. She knew exactly how many ships were coming and when they would arrive. The Admiral called another emergency meeting, but this time her expression was different. There was a cold determination in her eyes that made her officers nervous. "The Valdran Empire has chosen war. They are sending 600 warships to our border colonies. They expect us to surrender or be annihilated." Catherine paused and let her words sink in. "They expect us to behave like the other species they have conquered. They expect fear and desperation. Instead, we are going to show them why humanity does not surrender. We are going to demonstrate the cost of threatening our families and our freedom." She pulled up a tactical display that showed human territory and the approaching Valdran forces. "This is where we make our stand." Admiral Wright authorized the deployment of weapon systems that humanity had kept hidden for decades. Swarm drones began activating in storage facilities across 20 star systems. These drones were small and cheap to produce, but devastating in large numbers. Each one carried a micro-fusion charge and was guided by an artificial intelligence that could coordinate with millions of others simultaneously. Humanity had manufactured them in secret for years and now had nearly 10 million drones ready for deployment. The manufacturing facilities continued to produce more at a rate of 10,000 per hour. By the time the Valdran fleet arrived, humanity would have an unstoppable swarm ready to greet them. Catherine watched the production numbers climb on her display and allowed herself a grim smile. The Empire sent their best the first time. Now they would send more. It would not matter. 3 days later, the Valdran reinforcements arrived at the human border. Commander Zarthex had been given another chance to redeem himself, and now commanded all 600 ships. The fleet dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation across a light year of space. Zarthex had studied every byte of data from the first encounter and developed new tactics. The fleet would maintain maximum distance and bombard the human defenses until they collapsed. They would not be trapped again by gravity manipulation. They would not give the humans any opportunity for precision strikes. This would be a battle of attrition, and the Valdran had more ships and more weapons. Zarthex opened communications on all frequencies. Humans, this is your final opportunity to surrender. We have returned with overwhelming force. Your defenses cannot withstand this assault. Submit now or face complete destruction. You have 1 hour to respond. The transmission echoed across space and reached every human colony in the region. Jake Morrison received the ultimatum at Sentinel-9 and forwarded it to Fleet Command with a single comment attached. They still do not understand. Admiral Wright read Jake's message and agreed completely. She activated secure channels to all military installations and gave the authorization code that every officer had been waiting for. Execute Operation Swarm. All across human space, hidden platforms opened and released their cargo. Millions of tiny metallic spheres poured into space like schools of fish. They were so small that Valdran sensors barely registered them as threats. The spheres began accelerating toward the enemy fleet, while their AI systems coordinated approach patterns. The swarm moved with purpose and intelligence toward their targets. Zarthex saw the approaching cloud on his sensors and frowned. What are those? His tactical officer zoomed in on the objects and analyzed them quickly. Commander, they appear to be some kind of drone, very small and lightly armed. We can easily destroy them with point defense systems. Zarthex relaxed slightly, then do so. All ships engaged the drones. The Valdran fleet opened fire with their defensive weapons and cut through the first wave of drones easily. Thousands of tiny explosions lit up space. The silence on the Valdran flagship was absolute. Commander Zarthex sat in his command chair surrounded by dead displays and flickering emergency lights. His mighty warship drifted helplessly through space along with 599 others. Every major system was offline and repair crews worked frantically to restore basic power. The humans had not destroyed them, but they had demonstrated something perhaps more terrifying. They could have destroyed the entire fleet in seconds but chose to disable it instead. Zarthex understood the message perfectly. This was not a battle. This was a lesson. The humans were teaching the Valdran Empire what true power looked like. His communication officer managed to restore limited systems and established a connection to the human fleet. Commander, we are receiving a transmission. It is from Admiral Catherine Wright of the Terran Defense Fleet. Zarthex straightened in his chair despite the defeat. Put her through. Admiral Wright appeared on the damaged view screen with her silver hair and calm expression. She stood on the bridge of a ship that Zarthex had never seen before. The design was sleek and angular with lines that suggested both speed and power. Commander Zarthex, I am Admiral Catherine Wright. Your fleet has been disabled, but your crews are unharmed. We are prepared to repair your ships and allow you to return home. However, before we do that, you need to understand exactly who you have chosen to fight. Your empire operates on the assumption that you are the dominant military power in this region of space. That assumption is incorrect and dangerous. I am going to show you something that will make our position clear. Please do not mistake this demonstration for a threat. Consider it an act of honesty between potential adversaries. Zarthex felt dread settling into his stomach. What could be worse than what had already happened? He was about to find out. Catherine activated a holographic star map that appeared between her image and Zarthex. The map showed 3 spiral arms of the galaxy in stunning detail. Red dots began appearing across the map by the thousands. Each dot represents a human installation, Catherine explained calmly. Listening posts, defense platforms, research stations, and hidden shipyards. We have been expanding quietly for 2 centuries while your empire focused on conquest. You thought we controlled 70 star systems. The truth is more complicated. We have a presence in over 400 systems, and we have been watching everything your empire does. Zarthex stared at the map in disbelief. The red dots covered an area 10 times larger than Valdran territory. How was this possible? The humans were supposed to be a minor species barely worthy of attention. Catherine continued her explanation. We learned from history, Commander. Empires that expand through force eventually collapse from overextension. We chose a different path. We built in secret, studied alien technology, and developed innovations that your empire never imagined. But that is not the worst of it, Catherine said as the map zoomed in on a cluster of dots near the galactic core. These installations are automated shipyards powered by self-replicating construction drones. Each one can produce a fully armed warship every 6 hours. We have been building a fleet for decades, and the current count stands at 40,000 ships. Each vessel is equipped with technology that makes your warships look primitive by comparison. Zarthex felt his breath catch in his throat. 40,000 ships. The entire Valdran military fleet numbered less than 15,000, and most of those were scattered across the Empire maintaining order. If the humans deployed even a fraction of their hidden fleet, they could sweep through Valdran space and the Empire would fall within months. Catherine saw the understanding dawn in Zarthex's eyes. Now you begin to comprehend the situation. We did not reveal ourselves because we wanted to remain hidden. We did not build this fleet because we seek conquest. We prepared for defense because the galaxy is dangerous and we refuse to become victims. To demonstrate our capabilities, Admiral Wright continued, I am going to show you our newest warship. She gestured and the view screen split to show a new vessel appearing on sensors near the disabled Valdran fleet. The ship was called the TDFS Horizon, and it was unlike anything Zarthex had ever seen. Smaller than the Valdran flagships, but radiating power, the vessel seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The hull was covered in dark plating that made it nearly invisible against the background of space. Weapon ports lined its surface and advanced sensor arrays tracked everything within 1,000,000 kilometers. Chief Scientist Lisa Chen appeared next to Catherine on the screen. Dr. Chen designed the Horizon's primary weapon system, Catherine explained. Lisa, please provide a demonstration for our guest. Lisa nodded and her fingers moved across a control panel. The Horizon's weapon systems activated with a low hum that could be felt even through the vacuum of space. We will use that asteroid as a target, Lisa said and highlighted a massive rock roughly the size of Earth's moon, floating several thousand kilometers away. The asteroid has no strategic value and is not near any inhabited areas. The Horizon fired a single projectile that crossed the distance in less than a second. The asteroid did not explode. It did not shatter into pieces. It simply ceased to exist. One moment there was a massive rock floating in space. The next moment there was nothing but empty space where it had been. No debris field. No dust cloud. Nothing. The weapon we just fired, Lisa explained with clinical precision, manipulates quantum fields to induce controlled matter disintegration. It breaks down atomic bonds and converts solid matter into its component subatomic particles. Those particles are then dispersed harmlessly into space. The effective result is complete erasure of the target. The Horizon carries 40 such weapons, and each one can be fired independently. A single ship like this could erase an entire planet given enough time. Zarthex could not speak. His mouth opened, but no words came out. An entire moon-sized asteroid had been erased from existence as if it had never been there. The implications were staggering. If the humans had 40,000 ships and even a fraction of them carried weapons like that, they could dismantle the Valdran Empire system by system. Every planet, every station, every ship could be erased without a trace. Catherine Wright let the silence stretch for a moment before continuing. We have shown you this because you need to understand reality. The Valdran Empire cannot win a war against humanity. You would lose everything trying, and we would be forced to destroy an entire civilization that has existed for 3,000 years. That would be tragic and wasteful. We do not want that outcome. We want peace. Zarthex finally found his voice, and it sounded weak even to his own ears. What are your terms? Catherine's expression softened slightly. Our terms are simple. First, the Valdran Empire will sign a non-aggression treaty with humanity. You will withdraw all military forces from our border regions and recognize our sovereignty over our territory. Second, all captured Valdran personnel will be returned unharmed and your disabled ships will be fully repaired at our expense. We will even upgrade some of your damaged systems as a gesture of good faith. Third, We propose a trade agreement and cultural exchange program. Humanity has much to learn from the Valdrin, and we believe you could benefit from our technological innovations. Fourth and finally, we request that the Empire cease its expansion through conquest. The species you have subjugated deserve self-determination. We are not demanding you free them immediately, but we ask that you begin transitioning toward a more cooperative model of governance. Sarthex considered the terms and realized they were far more generous than he deserved. The humans could have demanded complete surrender or the dissolution of the Empire. Instead, they offered partnership. I cannot make these decisions alone, Zarthex admitted. I must present your terms to Emperor Korgath and the High Council. Catherine nodded. Of course. You have 48 hours to discuss this with your leadership and provide a response. In the meantime, our repair ships will begin restoring your fleet to operational status. Your crews will be provided with food, medical care, and anything else they need. Consider this time an opportunity to see how humanity treats even those who attack us. We do not seek revenge. We seek understanding. The transmission ended and Zarthex sat alone with his thoughts. Everything he had believed about Valdrin supremacy had been shattered in 3 encounters. The humans possessed overwhelming military power but chose restraint. They could have destroyed the Empire but offered peace instead. What kind of species did that? Perhaps, Zarthex thought, the kind of species that understood true strength was not measured in weapons but in wisdom. On the Valdrin homeworld, Emperor Korgath watched the recording of Admiral Wright's demonstration with his High Council assembled around him. The throne room was completely silent as the massive asteroid vanished from existence. When the recording ended, Korgath turned to Councillor Varath. You were right. We should have pursued diplomacy from the beginning. Varath bowed his head respectfully. Your Majesty, we still have that opportunity. The humans have offered generous terms and demonstrated that they prefer peace to war. We should accept before our pride costs us everything. Councillor Draxon, who had advocated for war, remained silent with his eyes downcast. Even he could not argue against the evidence before them. Korgath rose from his throne and addressed. 3 months after the Valdrin Empire accepted humanity's terms, representatives from both species met on Unity 1, a massive space station humanity had constructed specifically for diplomatic purposes. The station was a marvel of engineering with artificial gardens, variable gravity zones, and living quarters designed to accommodate dozens of different alien species. Crystal windows offered stunning views of a nearby nebula, while interior spaces featured artwork from both human and Valdrin cultures. The construction of Unity 1 had taken only 6 weeks thanks to human automated construction systems, and it stood as a physical demonstration of what humanity could build when motivated. Secretary of State Helen Parker led the human delegation with Admiral Catherine Wright serving as military advisor. Helen was 60 years old with diplomatic experience spanning 3 decades. Her reputation for fairness and tough negotiation had made her the obvious choice for these historic talks. Emperor Korgath arrived in person, a gesture that surprised everyone. Valdrin emperors rarely left their homeworld and never met with other species as equals. His presence signaled how seriously the Empire took these negotiations. Korgath entered the main conference chamber with Commander Zarthex at his side and an entourage of counselors behind him. The Emperor wore ceremonial armor polished to a mirror shine and carried himself with the dignity expected of his position. Helen Parker greeted him with a respectful bow that acknowledged his rank without suggesting submission. Emperor Korgath, welcome to Unity 1. We are honored by your presence and hopeful that these talks will begin a new era of cooperation between our peoples. Korgath returned the bow with equal respect. Secretary Parker, I come before you not as a conqueror, but as a leader who recognizes that the Valdrin Empire must change. Your species has shown us strength and mercy in equal measure. We have much to learn from you. The first week of negotiations was tense as both sides worked through centuries of cultural differences. The Valdrin had built their entire civilization on military conquest and hierarchy. The concept of cooperation between equals was foreign to them. Helen Parker and her team patiently explained human philosophy and political systems, while listening to Valdrin concerns about maintaining order across their vast empire. Gradually, understanding began to develop. The Valdrin realized that humanity's strength came not from domination, but from innovation and cooperation. Humans worked together voluntarily because they saw mutual benefit in doing so. This was a revolutionary concept for the Valdrin, but it was also practical. Building alliances was cheaper than maintaining occupation forces, and willing partners were more reliable than conquered subjects. Emperor Korgoth found himself agreeing with ideas that would have seemed absurd just months earlier. Commander, Zarthex spent much of his free time with Captain Jake Morrison, who had been invited to the station as a gesture of respect. The two military officers who had faced each other in battle now walked through Unity One's gardens discussing strategy and philosophy. Zarthex admitted something that had been troubling him since their first encounter. Captain Morrison, I underestimated humanity because your species avoided galactic conflicts. I interpreted your isolation as weakness. It was the mistake of someone who only understands power through violence. Jake smiled and plucked a flower from one of the garden beds. Commander, there is an old saying on Earth. The loudest person in the room is rarely the most powerful. Humanity learned through hard experience that civilizations that expand through constant conquest eventually collapse from overextension. Better to build slowly, defend wisely, and only fight when absolutely necessary. Zarthex considered this wisdom. Your restraint was actually a sign of strength. We never understood that. Jake offered the flower to Zarthex. Now you do. That makes you wiser than you were before. After 3 weeks of intensive negotiation, the Treaty of Unity was ready for signing. The agreement established clear borders between human and Valdran space with buffer zones to prevent accidental conflicts. It created trade partnerships that would benefit both civilizations and included technology exchange programs that would help the Valdran modernize their infrastructure. Most importantly, the treaty included a mutual defense clause. If either species faced an external threat, the other would provide military support. This clause transformed the relationship from former enemies to potential allies. The signing ceremony took place in Unity One's Grand Hall, with representatives from 17 other species attending as observers. News of the treaty had spread across the galaxy, and many species saw it as a beacon of hope. If humanity and the Valdran could make peace after such a dramatic conflict, perhaps the old order of empire and conquest could give way to something better. Emperor Korgoth signed first with the traditional four-armed Valdran gesture of commitment. Helen Parker signed next using a pen made from materials from both Earth and the Valdran homeworld. The document was sealed and transmitted simultaneously to every government in known space. The treaty was official and binding. Catherine Wright watched the ceremony from the side of the hall with satisfaction. She had spent her entire career preparing for war, and now she had helped build peace instead. It was a better legacy than she had ever imagined. After the ceremony, she found Jake Morrison standing by one of the large windows looking out at the stars. He had been promoted to Admiral in recognition of his actions at Sentinel-9, but he still preferred the simple title of Captain. You did well, Catherine said as she joined him. That confrontation could have escalated into a war that killed billions. Instead, you showed restraint and gave them a chance to understand. Jake shrugged modestly. I just did what needed doing. Besides, killing people is easy. Making them into friends is the real challenge. Within a year, the power structure of the local galactic region had shifted dramatically. The Valdran Empire began reforming its military and diplomatic policies using humanity as a model. Species that had suffered under Valdran domination cautiously reached out to both civilizations seeking their own treaties and trade agreements. Humanity found itself thrust into a leadership role it had never sought.
Admiral Catherine Wright was promoted to the newly created position of Galactic Defense Coordinator, with responsibility for managing defense agreements with 17 species.
She established protocols for responding to external threats and created joint training programs where different species could learn from each other. The days of single empires dominating through force were fading. A new era of cooperation and shared security was emerging with humanity, and the Valdran as unlikely partners at its center. Not everyone welcomed the new order. The Kryn Dominion from the Perseus arm watched humanity's rise with suspicion and fear. They were a militaristic empire similar to what the Valdran had been, and they saw the cooperation between species as a threat to their own expansion plans. The Dominion's War Council debated whether to strike against humanity, while the humans were still establishing their galactic presence. They sent scout ships to probe human defenses and assess vulnerabilities. The scouts never returned. 2 days later, the Dominion received a transmission from Admiral Catherine Wright. Her message was brief and delivered with the same calm authority that Jake Morrison had shown years before. Leaders of the Kryn Dominion, Your scouts entered our space without permission and refused to identify themselves. They have been detained and will be returned once we establish diplomatic relations. Humanity monitors all traffic in our territory, and we do not appreciate uninvited visitors. You have a choice to make. You can continue sending military assets into our space and we will continue detaining them. Or you can send diplomats and we can discuss peaceful relations. The choice is yours, but choose quickly. Our patience has limits. The Kryn War Council reviewed all available data on humanity, including the Valdrin's disastrous encounters. They analyzed the destruction of the asteroid and the capabilities of the human fleet. They calculated casualties and costs and probabilities of success. The conclusion was unanimous. War with humanity would be suicide. The Dominion opened diplomatic channels within hours and requested a meeting to discuss trade and mutual recognition. Catherine Wright accepted the request with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had expected exactly this outcome. Within months, the Kryn Dominion signed a non-aggression pact with humanity and began reforming their own military policies. Word spread quickly across the galaxy. Humanity was not to be challenged. Their technology was unmatched, their military was overwhelming, and their preference for diplomacy made them even more dangerous. Species that might have considered aggression instead sought friendship. Alliances formed and old rivalries faded as cooperation became more profitable than conquest. 5 years after first contact with the Valdrin, humanity had become one of the most respected species in the galaxy. Human technology was sought after by dozens of civilizations. Human diplomats were welcomed at every major government. The human military was feared but rarely needed because its mere existence prevented conflicts before they started. The hidden fleet of 40,000 ships remained ready but silent, a guardian force that ensured no one would repeat the Valdrin Empire's mistake. Trade flourished between human space and dozens of other civilizations.